The city was alive that night. But Ethan felt none of it. Cars hurried past in waves of noise and light, their reflections streaking across the window of his apartment. Inside, the world was still a single lamp on his desk, a half-finished cup of coffee, and a stack of unopened letters from people he hadn't spoken to in years. He had everything he thought he wanted: a stable job in architecture, a modern apartment overlooking the skyline, and enough money to live comfortably. But as the rain tapped against the glass, the silence pressed down like a weight he couldn't lift. Ethan leaned back in his chair, staring at the city lights that glittered like promises just out of reach. For years, he had told himself that moving to the city was the answer, that leaving his small hometown behind meant growth, freedom, success. Yet somehow, with every milestone he reached, he felt a little more lost. He couldn't remember the last time he'd laughed without forcing it. He couldn't remember the last time someone really saw him. People often described him as calm and composed, the kind of man who always had it together. But inside, Ethan carried a quiet ache he never talked about. It wasn't just loneliness. It was the feeling that something essential had gone missing along the way, something he couldn't quite name. Maybe it was love. Maybe it was belonging. Maybe it was both. He stood up and walked to the window. The rain had thickened, turning the streets below into rippling mirrors. He used to love the rain when he was younger. Back then, it meant afternoons spent on the porch, watching the drops slide off the roof while his neighbor Clara brought him a cup of hot cocoa. They were kids then, inseparable, full of dreams they couldn't wait to chase. He smiled faintly at the memory, though it faded as quickly as it came. Clara had stayed in their hometown, choosing a simple, quiet life close to her family. Ethan, on the other hand, had been too eager to leave, convinced that happiness waited somewhere far away, in the noise and speed of bigger things. But now, surrounded by everything he had once thought he wanted, he wondered if he had mistaken movement for meaning. That night, Ethan sat at his desk and opened one of the old letters. It was from his mother, written 2 years ago. The handwriting was soft and uneven, her words warm in a way that made his chest tighten. "I hope you're doing well, sweetheart. Everyone here misses you, especially Clara. She stopped by last week to ask how you were. Said she found one of your old sketchbooks in the attic. She wanted to keep it safe until you visit again." Keith put the letter down, his hand lingering on the paper. The idea of visiting again sounded almost foreign to him. He hadn't been home in nearly 5 years. The last time he visited, he'd promised to come back soon. But soon had turned into years without realizing it. He took a deep breath and turned off the lamp. The city glowed outside his window, a restless, glittering reminder of how far he'd come. Yet, for the first time, the lights didn't inspire him. They just looked. Cold dot. When he finally lay down, he couldn't sleep. His mind kept returning to the thought of Clara, that sketchbook she had found, and to the sound of his mother's gentle voice reading those words aloud. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was everything. The next morning, he woke up early and stepped onto his balcony. The storm had passed, leaving behind the faint scent of rain and the soft hum of traffic below. He stood there, looking out over the waking city, wondering why he felt so empty after achieving so much. People said that happiness was about chasing dreams. But Ethan wasn't so sure anymore. Maybe it wasn't about chasing. Maybe it was about noticing he spent that day at work. But his focus drifted. Every conversation felt shallow. Every compliment about his latest project felt hollow. When his coworker invited him to a weekend party, he smiled politely and declined. He couldn't explain it, but something inside him was pulling, not forward, not upward, but backward, toward a place he'd long ignored that evening. As he packed away his laptop, his phone buzzed with a message. He glanced at the screen and froze. Clara. "Hey, Ethan, it's been a while. I found some of your old things in the attic at my mom's house. Do you want to come by and get them?" Ethan stared at the message, a rush of warmth and unease flooding through him. Clara, her name alone brought back the sound of laughter under summer skies, the smell of rain on the porch, the comfort of someone who once knew him better than anyone else. He typed a reply, then erased it. He didn't know what to say. After a long pause, he finally wrote, "Sure, when would be a good time?" The response came quickly. "Anytime this weekend. It'd be nice to catch up." He exhaled slowly, setting his phone down. For a long time, he just sat there in silence, feeling something shift quietly inside him, a small flicker of emotion he hadn't felt in years. Maybe this wasn't just about old boxes or forgotten sketchbooks. Maybe it was a chance to see what he'd been running from all along, outside. The sun dipped below the skyline, painting the horizon with deep gold and violet. The city lights began to flicker on, one by one, as if trying to convince him to stay. But in his heart, Ethan knew something had changed. He didn't know what he would find when he went back home. But for the first time in a long time, he wanted to find out. Ethan's car slowed as he turned onto the narrow road that led into his hometown. The golden light of late afternoon filtered through the trees, scattering across the windshield in soft, flickering patterns. Every bend of the road carried a memory. Old bike rides, summer laughter, the smell of fresh rain after school. He hadn't realized how deeply he'd missed it until that moment. The sign that read, "Welcome to Maple Hollow," appeared just ahead, weathered and faded, just like he remembered. Beneath it, wildflowers grew in uneven clusters, the same ones Clara used to pick when they were kids. He smiled quietly at the thought. The drive through town felt like stepping into a storybook he once belonged to. The bakery on the corner still had the same red awning, the same old couples sitting outside sharing muffins. The small bookstore where Clara once worked still had its bell over the door and its open sign written by hand. Nothing had changed. Except him, when he finally parked outside the old white house with the porch swing. He sat there for a moment just looking at it. The swing was still there, only now it moved gently with the breeze. As if waiting, Clara opened the door before he could even knock. Her hair was shorter now, and her expression calmer. But her smile was the same, the kind that warmed everything around it. "Ethan," she said softly, as though the name itself carried years of distance. "Hey," he replied, smiling back a little awkwardly. "It's been a while," she nodded. "It really has." There was a pause, not uncomfortable, just quiet. The kind that holds all the words people don't know how to say. "Come in," she said finally. Stepping aside, the house smelled like cinnamon and coffee. Photographs lined the walls, her parents, her little niece, a few of the town festivals. It felt alive, like a place that had always been full of love. They walked into the living room, where a few cardboard boxes sat neatly on the floor. Clara pointed toward them. "These are yours. I found them when I was cleaning the attic. I thought you might want them back." Ethan crouched to open the first one. Inside were fragments of another time, old sketches, a baseball cap, a collection of dried-up pens, and a photo of him and Clara at the county fair. She was holding a giant teddy bear. He was laughing, trying to balance a melting ice cream cone. He held the photo up. "We were such a mess that day." She laughed softly. "You dropped your cone on my shoes. I pretended to be mad for hours." "You were convincing," he said with a grin. "I thought I'd ruined everything." Clara shook her head, still smiling. "You never could ruin anything, Ethan." For a moment, silence settled again. Not the kind that felt empty, but one that held old emotions quietly stirring back to life. They spent the next hour sorting through the boxes, trading memories between them like small treasures. Every object had a story: a broken keychain from their high school trip, a ticket stub from a movie they never finished because they'd spent the whole time talking in the lobby, a music CD they used to play on endless summer drives. Each memory brought them a little closer, and a little sadder, because beneath the laughter, there was the ache of everything they hadn't said before life had pulled them apart. As the sun began to sink outside, painting the room with warm orange light, Ethan glanced toward Clara. She was sitting cross-legged on the floor, brushing dust from an old yearbook. The light caught her hair just right, and for a second, he saw her the way he used to, full of dreams and unspoken kindness. "You stayed," he said quietly. "All these years." Clara looked up. "Yeah. Someone had to keep the place from falling apart." He smiled faintly. I always thought you'd move to the city, too. You used to talk about it all the time. I did, she said, tracing her finger along the edge of the yearbook. But somewhere along the way, I realized I didn't need to go far to feel alive. I liked the quiet, the people, the sense of belonging. Her voice softened at the last word. Ethan nodded slowly, his gaze drifting to the window. I thought belonging was something you had to earn, that it only came when you achieved enough, became enough. And now? She asked gently. He hesitated, then smiled with quiet sadness. Now I'm not so sure. They moved to the porch as evening settled in. Fireflies flickered over the yard, and the air smelled faintly of pine and rain. Clara Poe. Ethan woke the next morning to the soft sound of birds chirping outside the window. The sunlight spilled through the curtains, casting gentle streaks across the room. It felt different here, quieter, warmer, alive, than any morning he had spent in the city. He brewed a cup of coffee and stepped onto the porch, where Clara was already tending to a small row of potted flowers she had set out the day before. The scent of soil and blooming petals filled the air, and for a moment, he simply watched her. She noticed him but didn't turn around immediately. She hummed softly, arranging a small cluster of daisies in a new pot. Then, finally, she looked up. Her eyes met his, and Ethan felt that familiar, unspoken connection settle over them. "Morning," she said lightly, a hint of playfulness in her voice. "Morning," he replied, unsure why his heart suddenly felt so unsteady after breakfast. They decided to walk through the small town. The streets quiet as the town slowly stirred awake. Maple Hollow had changed little in the years he had been gone. The same brick sidewalks, the same corner store, the same fountain in the park where children played. As they walked side by side, their conversation drifted naturally. They spoke about ordinary things, new books in the bookstore, the upcoming town festival, a cat that had moved into Clara's yard. Yet every laugh, every glance carried the weight of years apart and years of unspoken feelings. At one point, they passed the old library where they had spent countless afternoons as teenagers, devouring stories and whispering about their dreams. "You used to spend hours in there," Clara said softly, "always reading something new. I think you liked escaping more than anything." Ethan smiled. "Maybe I did. But you were always the one who kept me grounded, reminded me there was a world outside the pages." She glanced at him, a small fleeting smile tugging at her lips. "And now, are you still escaping?" He shook his head slowly. "Not anymore. I'm not sure I want to." As they continued walking, a sudden gust of wind caught Ethan's hat and sent it tumbling toward the fountain. He dashed after it, laughing as he chased it through the shallow water, careful not to slip on the whetstone. Clara followed, her laughter ringing clear, soft, and full of life. When he finally retrieved the hat, dripping and slightly bent, he looked up to see her standing near the fountain, eyes bright and cheeks flushed from laughter. "You're hopeless," she teased. "Shaking her head, maybe," he said, breathing hard. "Or maybe I'm just practicing being a hero for once." She rolled her eyes but smiled, and for a moment the years apart melted away. Ethan realized how easily they could fall back into the rhythm of being together, how natural it felt to share a space with someone who knew him inside and out. Later, they wandered into the park where an unexpected event shifted the entire day. A small lost dog had wandered into the park, trembling and clearly frightened. Without hesitation, Clara crouched down, coaxing the dog gently with soft words. Ethan helped her, and together they managed to calm it, finding a tag on its collar and calling the owner, as the dog ran safely back to its family. Ethan watched Clara. She moved with quiet confidence, empathy radiating from her every gesture. He felt a deep surge of admiration and something else, something he hadn't acknowledged in years. Longing, he realized that it wasn't just nostalgia pulling him toward her. It was the present moment, the reality of her kindness, her laughter, her steady presence. Something in him stirred that he hadn't allowed himself to feel since leaving Hope. The day waned into evening, and they returned to Clara's porch with a quiet companionship that spoke louder than words. The sky was painted with streaks of pink and gold, the air soft and gentle. Ethan noticed how the shadows fell on her face, the slight curl of her hair catching the light. They sat in silence for a while, each lost in thought before Clara spoke. "Do you ever think about why we drifted apart?" she asked, her voice tender but curious. Ethan took a deep breath. "I guess I was chasing something I didn't understand. I thought I needed to leave to find it, and now," he said slowly, meeting her eyes, "I think maybe what I was searching for was never out there. Maybe it was always here." Clara's eyes softened, a quiet understanding passing between them. They didn't need to say more. The words had been spoken in the gentle brush of their hands, in the shared laughter, in the way their eyes met across the porch as night fell. The stars began to emerge, tiny lights scattered across the deep indigo sky. Ethan felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, a sense of belonging, not just to a place, but to a person, to a connection that had survived years, distance and silence. He realized that fate, coincidence, or perhaps the universe itself had brought him back here, to Clara, to the memories and the warmth he had ignored for too long. It was a twist of life that seemed too perfect to be accidental, and yet it felt completely natural. For the first time, he understood that love wasn't always about grand gestures or dramatic confessions. Sometimes it was about quiet moments, small coincidences, and the courage to notice what's been in front of you all along. And in that moment, Ethan knew he had come home not just to a town or a house, but to a heart he had never truly left. The evening air settled softly around Ethan and Clara as they sat on the porch swing, the world quiet except for the faint rustle of leaves. The sky above was darkening, scattered stars peeking through the fading light. They didn't speak at first. Words felt too heavy, too vulnerable. And yet the silence itself carried more meaning than either could say aloud. Ethan watched Clara's hands as she traced the edge of the wooden swing. Her movements were calm, deliberate, yet he could sense the unspoken tension beneath the surface. He remembered the days of their youth, the way they would sit like this for hours, talking about dreams they barely dared to say out loud. "Do you ever wonder," he began hesitantly, "why some things never got said between us?" Clara didn't look up immediately. Instead, she inhaled slowly, as if measuring the weight of his question before responding. "Sometimes," she said finally, her voice soft but steady. "But I guess some things just linger quietly, don't they? Waiting for the right time or the right person to notice them." Ethan nodded, feeling a familiar ache settle in his chest. He had spent years wondering if he had left something behind or if he had left someone behind. And now, sitting here, he realized the truth. It wasn't just nostalgia or memories pulling at him. It was her. It had always been her. They began to talk slowly, cautiously, about the years they had been apart. He told her about the loneliness in the city, the moments when everything he built felt hollow. She listened quietly, nodding, never interrupting, her eyes full of understanding. "I thought I was chasing something that would make me complete," he admitted, voice low. "But no matter what I achieved, there was always something missing." Clara's gaze softened. "Maybe it wasn't something you were missing. Maybe it was someone—" Ethan swallowed hard. Her words lingered, delicate and precise, like a key turning in a lock he didn't know he'd been carrying. He wanted to tell her everything, that he had thought of her countless times, that he had wondered if she had ever thought of him, that he had longed to return to this very porch, to this very swing. But the words lodged in his throat. The fear of saying too much too soon held him back. Clara's hand rested on her lap, and for a moment he imagined reaching out, letting his fingers brush hers. The simple gesture carried a weight he hadn't anticipated, the weight of years, the weight of love unspoken, the weight of a connection that had never really faded. "I always wondered," Clara said quietly after a long pause, "if you'd ever come back. I mean, really come back? Not just visit, but stay for a while, see the town, see us." Ethan looked at her, surprised by how much her words mirrored his own thoughts. I didn't realize, he said, how much I needed to, how much I wanted to, until now. She didn't respond right away. Instead, she looked out at the darkening horizon, her eyes reflecting the soft glow of the porch light. Ethan understood the hesitation. They had both changed. Life had carried them in different directions. Yet beneath it all, the bond remained, I guess, she said finally, turning to face him. Sometimes we think we're ready for things before we really are, or we're too afraid to admit what we're feeling. I think maybe I was afraid too. Her confession, quiet and unassuming, filled the space between them. Ethan felt his chest tighten. Years of longing, years of unspoken words, suddenly seemed tangible, pressing gently against his heart. They sat in silence for a long while, neither daring to break it, yet both feeling closer than they had in years. There was no rush, no urgency, only the steady rhythm of understanding, of two hearts speaking without words. Ethan thought of all the times he had tried to chase something outside himself, outside this town, outside this connection. And now, sitting here, he understood. Love didn't always need a grand confession. Sometimes it needed patience, presence, and the courage to simply notice what had always been there. Clara glanced at him, her expression soft but searching. Ethan, do you ever regret leaving? He shook his head slowly. I don't regret leaving. I regret not realizing sooner what mattered most. I spent so much time looking for answers outside, I didn't see them right here. She smiled faintly, a mixture of relief and quiet wonder. Maybe we just needed time to grow, separately, to understand ourselves. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of autumn leaves and distant rain. Ethan and Clara walked along the edge of the park, their footsteps echoing softly on the damp pavement. The town had a calm rhythm now, slower than the city he had left behind, and it allowed him to think, to feel, to finally confront emotions he had buried for years. They had spent the last few days reliving old memories, sharing quiet conversations and feeling the comfort of each other's presence. But despite the closeness, there was still an unspoken weight between them, a truth neither had dared voice, though both felt it pressing quietly in their hearts as they reached the old wooden bridge that spanned the little river running through the park. Clara stopped and leaned against the railing, watching the water swirl below. Ethan lingered beside her, hesitant, feeling the tension of years finally gathering to a point. Do you ever think about how different things could have been? Ethan asked, his voice low. Clara didn't respond immediately. She traced the lines in the wooden railing with her fingers as if searching for an answer written there. All the time, she admitted at last. I think about choices, about timing, about what we never said to each other. Ethan felt a jolt of recognition, that exact longing, that same quiet ache mirrored in her voice. It was as if the universe had been holding this moment for them, waiting for the courage to emerge. I shouldn't have left the way I did, Ethan said, finally letting the words spill. His chest felt heavy, but speaking them brought a strange relief. I thought I was chasing something important in the city, but the truth is I've been chasing the wrong things my whole life. All I really wanted was here. I didn't realize it until now. Clara looked at him, her eyes wide but steady, and he could see the emotion she had kept hidden for so long. Hesitation, hope, longing, all mingled in her gaze. Ethan swallowed, his hands tightening at his sides. Clara, I never stopped caring about you. I never stopped thinking about what we had, what we could have had. I didn't know how to say it then, and maybe I thought it was too late. But it's not. It can't be. A quiet breeze stirred, ruffling their hair, carrying the sound of distant children laughing in the park. Clara stepped closer, her hands brushing his lightly, testing the boundaries of courage. I've waited, Ethan, she said softly. Not in sadness, but in hope. Hope that you'd see one day that this we was never just a memory. It was always real. And I guess I've been afraid too. Afraid to say it, afraid it wouldn't matter anymore. Ethan reached out, gently taking her hands in his. The warmth of her palms against his felt like an anchor, steadying the flood of emotions that had been trapped inside him for years. "Clara, it matters," he said, his voice thick with sincerity. "It has always mattered. And I don't want to waste another day wondering what if. I can't imagine going back to that city, to that life, without you here." Without this, her lips curved into a tentative smile, and for the first time in years, the weight between them seemed to lift slightly. "So, what happens now?" she asked, her voice trembling just enough to betray her vulnerability. Ethan paused. Looking out at the river flowing beneath the bridge, he thought of the years of chasing, of wandering, of moments spent longing for something he couldn't name. And he realized that everything had led him here to this bridge, to her, to the quiet truth that had always been waiting for him. "Now," he said gently, "we stop running. We stop searching outside ourselves for something that's been right here all along. And we start being present, together, really together." Clara's eyes glistened as she squeezed his hands. It's a quiet affirmation that the same truth had lived inside her all this time. They didn't need grand declarations or promises of perfection. Their honesty, their vulnerability, and the shared understanding of years apart was enough to change everything. They stood there on the bridge for a long moment, letting the silence speak volumes. The rustle of leaves, the gentle lapping of the river, and the distant hum of life in the town became the soundtrack of their turning point. The unspoken truth between them had finally been acknowledged. And in doing so, it transformed into something tangible, something alive. Ethan felt a lightness he hadn't known in years, a release of the burden of longing, the uncertainty, the what-ifs. Clara's presence beside him was proof that life sometimes allowed second chances. That timing could be imperfect, yet perfect at the same time as the sun dipped lower in the sky, painting the horizon with shades of gold and lavender. They finally let themselves lean into the closeness that had been simmering for so long. No words were necessary beyond the gentle squeeze of their hands and the quiet smiles they shared in that moment. Ethan realized that love didn't need drama or spectacle. It needed honesty, courage, and the willingness to face feelings long ignored. And Clara, patient, kind, enduring, had given him the space and the signal he needed to finally speak the truth. And in her eyes, he saw that the feeling had always been mutual. The turning point had arrived. Their hearts, once separated by distance and fear, now aligned, steady and certain, ready to face whatever came next together.